All right, everybody, it is 12 o'clock on the dot, so let's go ahead and get started. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our Department of Medicine Grand Rounds. My name is Ryan Abe, and I'm one of our internal medicine chief residents. Today, I have the pleasure of introducing our speaker, Dr. Alvin Calderon. Dr. Calderon is a hospitalist and core faculty for internal medicine residency program at Virginia Mason, where he completed his residency training in 2003, completed a chief year, and served as program director from 2008 to 2018. In 2020, he was elected to serve on the APDIM Council. He brings a social science perspective to patient care and medical education, having completed his undergraduate degree in anthropology at Dickinson College and a PhD in sociology from the joint degree program at the University of Illinois. His current interests include psychological safety in the clinical learning environment, applying a growth mindset to medical education, and understanding the role of shame, guilt, vulnerability, and courage in medicine. He'll be talking with us today about growth mindset in medical education. And as a reminder to those in the audience, please post your questions in the chat, and I will pose them to our speaker at the end of the presentation. So without further ado, I will turn over the stage to Dr. Calderon. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you so much, Dr. Abe. What a treat to be introduced by a chief resident. So chief residents are near and dear to my heart as a program director and as a prior chief resident. And today's talk, I really want to focus on at least two audiences who I hope are listening. One would be your residents, so the residents of the University of Washington, as well as the faculty. And we're going to talk about growth mindset in medical education. There are going to be some times in the talk where I'm going to ask you to contribute. And so do have your chat active. I hope that you participate because we're going to get started and it's going to start right now. As soon as I get my thing to click, it'll start. There we go. So before we start, what I want you to do is I want you to check in. And this is a time where you can enter into the chat. I want you to identify at least two emotions that you are experiencing today or recently. If you're having trouble conjuring which emotions you are experiencing, you can use this handy wheel to identify them. And if you like, please share them in the chat. Or if you're with other people, if you have that opportunity, why don't you go ahead and tell them at least two emotions that you're experiencing. So I hope that some of our 43 people at least type in something. Somebody give me something. I'll tell you that I'm feeling exhilarated. I feel ready. Oh, thank you. Thank you, John. I appreciate that. Curious and optimistic. Oh, Cerner, got it. Happy and delighted. Thank you. Thank you, Jenny. Oh, great to hear from you. Oh, optimistic. Oh, great. Content, calm. Oh, I'm so delighted to see some friends chiming in too. All right, so thank you for that. That helps me understand where you are as an audience too. I have no relevant disclosures, so let's begin. Here's the outline for the talk. We're going to be talking about growth mindset in medical education. We'll give you an introduction. We'll talk about ways that we've applied it at Virginia Mason and other places, and we'll talk about myths, challenges, and the future. So, mindset. What is a mindset? A mindset is an implicit or explicit system of belief about yourself, others, and the world around you. We all have mindsets, these implicit theories about how we think the world works and our role in it. This talk will focus mostly on the work of this person. This is Dr. Carol Dweck. She's at Stanford. And for decades, she's been doing research. It was popularized in 2006. This book is now 15 years old, her book Mindset. Her fundamental question over decades of research were, one of them was, why do some kids, when faced with failure, seem to be depressed, depleted, down, whereas some other kids, when faced with the same or similar failure, seem to be energized, activated, elated even? What could account for such wide variation in experiences from arguably the same experience? And so in her research, she had come to observe that we all oscillate back and forth between two polarities of mindsets. One of them she popularized as called the fixed mindset, and another one she popularized as a growth mindset. So we're going to spend our time describing each one of those mindsets and then putting them into context. And we'll start with a fixed mindset. A fixed mindset is an implicit theory that you have that your talents, your skills, your abilities are all things that you are born with. And as such, you are granted, given, bestowed an unchangeable, immutable, fixed amount. You get what you get. If that's the case, you desire to look smart. Appearances really matter. And so you go around every day trying to prove that whatever it is we're talking about, your talent, your skill, your ability, that you have a lot of it. And so when residency or even being an attending becomes challenging, you might act out of this implicit theory. So a challenge, if you know you can overcome the challenge, you would take it. But if there's any doubt about overcoming the challenge, why would you take it? It would just be an opportunity to show your limit. And why would you want to show that? Obstacles, you would understand that to be the universe's way of telling you you've reached the edge of your ability and you can stop. In fact, there's nothing else to do. You have to stop. Effort. Wait a second. If you've really got the talent, skills, and ability, shouldn't everything become easily? So you might fear working hard because of what it might say about your capacity. Criticism. You can hear, or feedback, you can hear positive feedback. But what do you do with corrective feedback if fundamentally you don't think that you can change? The success of others becomes threatening because if somebody is better than you now, they always will be. And finally, a fixed mindset, this idea that your talent, skills, and abilities are defined and unchangeable, will frame the way you look at failure. In a fixed mindset, when you fail, you are a failure. Those failures will define you. And those are all consequences of having an implicit theory that says that you are unchangeable. And as I said, we all oscillate back and forth between these two mindsets, between having a fixed mindset and something called a growth mindset. So growth mindset would say, oh no, your talents, your skills, your abilities, these are all things that can change. Your intelligence can be improved. If that's the case, your orientation is around learning. What do I need to learn? What have I learned? What am I going to learn? And if you have that mindset, when your residency or being an attending becomes difficult, you can act out of this mindset. So challenges, you would say, bring them on, harder the better, because you know a good challenge will put you right on the edge of what you need to learn next, and that's where all the learning happens. Obstacles aren't in your way, they show you the way. Instead of thinking of them as obstacles, you might think of them as obstacles. They'll point you in the right direction. Or you might reframe an obstacle as a hurdle, because hurdles are things that you leap over. Effort, while uncomfortable, you understand that as necessary, because that's what it feels like to learn and grow. And so you don't fear that experience. Criticism and feedback, well, you can hear positive feedback, but you will seek out corrective feedback, asking, what am I doing wrong? How am I failing? Becomes a safe question because you will use that information. And then the success of others becomes inspiring. It tells you, oh, that's how good it could be. That's how good I could be. And then a growth mindset, which is a fundamental orientation around learning, can reframe your relationship to failure. So that is, you could have the Michael Jordan approach, which is to say, I have failed over and over and over. That is why I succeed. Or you could have the Serena Williams approach, which is to say, every time I fail, I get 10 times stronger. Now I want to continue this compare contrast so you really get a sense of how these mindsets are different. So in a fixed mindset, It's about proving, I'm proving. There's always, appearances really matter, and so you want to focus on looking smart. Comparison, you want to be better than others. You understand your failures to be tragedies, and anytime you get critical feedback, you equate that with failure. I like to personify the fixed mindset as a thief. It is a thief that is stealing what your experience is teaching you right at the point that it's being taught. In the literature, it's understood as the be good mindset. Carol Dweck referred to it as entity theory. It's about who you are. In contrast, growth mindset, instead of I'm proving, it's improving. The focus is on learning. There's still a comparison. It's you, and you want to perform better than you did before. You understand your failures to be your teachers, and you will use failure as critical feedback to improve. I like to use the metaphor of a garden for a growth mindset, because we all are like seeds that want to grow. And then for us, the faculty, we tend the garden. We cultivate the soil so that everyone can grow. In the literature, the growth mindset is known as the get better mindset or incremental theory. You can incrementally change. Now, this is about mindsets that you have about yourself. But the audience I'm speaking to are either teachers now or teachers to be. And so what if you have a fixed mindset about those you teach? In that case, if you have a fixed mindset about others that they can't change, then you would understand them to have permanent traits. And then your role is judgment. What does that look like? It means sort. Your job is to identify who are the good ones, who are the bad ones, who are the weak ones, who are the strong ones. All you have to do is figure that out. We would then praise talent and intelligence when we see success. And when we see failure, we console. Because if they failed, that was inevitable, and we should console them. And if our learners fail, we have to lower our expectations because they cannot get any better. On the other hand, you could have a growth mindset about your learners. That is, you would see them as developing people. Your role then as a teacher is to develop them. Our goal is to help them become better than they were before. We can praise them for their deliberate practices, perseverance, and strategies when they succeed. And when they fail, we help them find the learning. And when they fail, we can keep our high expectations of them because we know that they can change. And I'll give you a brief introduction to some samples of the research. So Carol Dweck in this study looked at seventh graders who were testing in the 30th percentile in math, 30th percentile and going down. So in this group of students, they gave all of them study skills. One group, they just only gave them study skills. This would be mnemonics to help them remember. In that group, what they saw after only giving them these study skills is a continued decline on their prior trajectory, being in the 30th percentile. For another group of these seventh grade students, in addition to those mnemonics, they also taught them about growth mindset and said, you know what, your brain can learn. With perseverance, practice, coaching, teaching that we're offering you, you can get better. And so an attempt to change their implicit theory. With that group, and that being the only difference, it completely changed the trajectory 2 years later in the GPA of these students. Getting closer to the age of our residents and ourselves, this is a study looking at mindset matters in response to challenges. And so it turns out that you can condition people in mindsets by doing this. You can tell one group, the point of this exercise is to improve. This is an opportunity to develop your problem-solving skills. That would be a growth mindset conditioning. You can condition people into a fixed mindset experimentally by telling them the point of this test is to prove how smart you are, and we will compare you to others. And now, once those conditions are set, students, these are undergraduates, were given logic problems to solve. And so who do you think did better? Interestingly, this is a use case potentially for a fixed mindset. For simple, solvable problems, a fixed mindset can compel you to do well, simply because who you are is at stake. That would be for a simple, solvable, and uninterrupted task. Now, what happens if we complicate the task? So in another exercise, they had students do the same logic problems, except somewhere within the time frame of their responding to these logic questions, the computer would freeze up and they basically had to type as fast as they could for about 1 minute. So in essence, they simulated what it's like to interact with an electronic medical record, for instance. And so in that interrupted state, how did these students respond? Well, it turns out there really wasn't much difference. It appears that the growth mindset condition actually did better. There really no difference, although the experience of the experience was much different. Those in the fixed mindset who thought this was defining them, they had a much harder, they were sadder, they were more anxious about that experience, even though there was no difference in their performance. There's a burgeoning neuroscience that's looking at how these mindsets affect the way that we process mistakes. So in this study, conditioned the same way, growth mindset would be, this is an example, an opportunity to learn versus fixed mindset. This is defining who you are and will compare you to others. The task here is identifying the non-concordant letter. So for instance, the M amongst the N's or the F amongst the E's. In the growth mindset condition, when monitored, looking for signals that their brains are using mistakes to learn and improve, those event-related potentials were very active. So they were taking information as they were making mistakes, using those errors to improve. Whereas in a fixed mindset state, those same parts of your brain that are processing prediction errors are silent. And this, I would say, is an example of the fixed mindset thief stealing the feedback that your experience is trying to give you right at the point that it's being taught. And so what are some of the educational outcomes? And mind you, mindset is often studied in high school grades in schools, actually in college as well. So students' response to academic setback, growth mindset as a buffer against demotivation, so effective. And then interestingly, a 30-minute online intervention called a university mindset resulted in a 3% increase in students earning 12 or more credits. And that itself was predictive of graduation. So really low time commitment interventions potentially with life-changing, that is graduation effects. So we've talked about mindsets as they exist in individuals, but these mindsets are also constructed and reinforced in organizations. And so I want to show you a couple of organizational charts from technology companies that all of us will be familiar with. So for instance, Amazon, with Jeff Bezos at the top of a perfect hierarchy. This was a funny meme in the 2000s, or Facebook, or should I say Meta, the social network. And you can see it's exactly what it is. Again, this is just kind of a funny representation. Or Apple, with the late, great Steve Jobs at the center. And then there was Microsoft. And so perhaps some of you were around in the early 2000s when Microsoft was under its previous leadership. And for me, I can tell you the people that I knew who were at Microsoft in the early 2000s, they would say this is pretty accurate. Groups competing against each other. And part of that was structural, because if you were a manager at Microsoft, regardless if you had the highest performing group or the lowest performing group, you still had to rank order all of your subordinates, best employee, worst employee. That is a great way to create a fixed mindset environment. And so what do? You're Microsoft, an international organization, over 100,000 people. How do you change? Well, if you're Satya Nadella, what you do is you hit refresh. So he took over at Microsoft in 2014, and introduced growth mindset to the leadership team. And within 2 years, he had turned that organization around, I should say, propelled its growth to the point where Carol Dweck actually was writing an article in the Harvard Business Review about how Microsoft uses growth mindset to develop leaders. If you used to be able to look at their culture and values page, and you could see growth mindset was right there. At Microsoft, we are insatiably curious, always learning. We ask questions, take risks, build on each other's ideas because we are better together. We lean into uncertainty, take risks, and move quickly when we make mistakes because we know failure happens along the way to innovation and breakthrough. So Satya Nadella wanted to take Microsoft from a know-it-all culture to a learn-it-all culture. There are other examples of organizations that have embraced growth mindset. So LinkedIn is an example. Sephora, international beauty company. I've seen their management materials and they taught growth mindset to their managers. The third symbol there is Virginia Mason. And then if you listen to our football team, the Seahawks, for a while they had an extraordinary sports psychologist. And I know that they were using the constructs of growth mindset as they were growing. And we're going to need it, aren't we? We'll see how we do. And so now that you've had this introduction to growth mindset in general, perhaps you can think about the people that you know, perhaps family, people that you spend time with, and try to estimate what portion do you think tend to have to be more on the fixed side? What portion do you think tend to be more on the growth side? Once you put a percentage in your head, I'll tell you, it's about 50-50. So in the general population, it's about 50 or 40-40 on each side. Law students are an interesting comparison because they're kind of the same educational background and age of our medical students, also about 50-50. And so at this point, we'll just pause from the introduction, and I'll tell you what I want you to understand about growth mindset. I think one of the major points is that growth mindset says that you can change. Having growth mindset doesn't mean you can do anything. Rather, it indicates that your potential is unknown and to be discovered. Your task is to be better than you were before. And if you are in charge of leading, or if you are a teacher, your task is to believe other people can change too. One thing that you get by having a growth mindset is the capacity to do difficult things. And the only failure is the failure to learn. And so we'll transition to start thinking about growth mindset in the context of medical education. And we can start with the milestones. And so Milestones 2.0 for the educators in the room, you can see that this has been released under practice-based learning and improvement, reflective practice and commitment to personal growth. It's in there almost explicitly. Level 2 would be demonstrates openness to data to inform goals, actively seeks opportunities to improve. Level 4 seeks performance data consistent with adaptability and humility, uses performance data to measure effectiveness of individualized learning, planned and when necessary, improves. And so I think that there's a real theme of growth mindset in the milestones. We don't really know too much about the distribution of growth mindset or mindsets in general in medical education. There's a couple hints that we can have. This is one study that looked at mindset theories in pediatricians, pediatric residents and attendings. And so what do you think the proportion of pediatric residents and attendings who have a growth mindset versus a fixed mindset? Mind you, pediatricians, this is the group of physicians that will literally measure the circumference of kids' brains as they grow. They have growth charts. What percentage of pediatricians do you think have fixed and growth? Well, it turns out it's pretty close to the general population. And I think that's what you get unless you really pursue growth mindset as something that you want to develop yourself. I've seen other research looking at how this is really very much domain specific. So clinical supervisors, this is a study from Canada. So in terms of clinical reasoning, 92 of those clinical supervisors had a growth mindset about clinical reasoning. I think that's a room for optimism. At the same time, only 50% or 47% had a growth mindset about things like empathy, intelligence, moral character. So half thought that these were immutable and unchangeable. All right. So now we can start thinking about where do these mindsets exist in our learners and in ourselves. One place that they exist is in our self-talk. So we talk to ourselves all the time. In fact, many people, not all, can hear the conversation that they're having with themselves. And it's important to talk about that because today you'll have 1 thought a second, 50 thoughts a minute, 3,000 thoughts this hour, 50,000 thoughts today, 1.5 billion thoughts in your lifetime. And so the question becomes, how's that conversation going? In your mind, talking to yourself, are you your best coach or are you your worst critic? Okay, because we can see these mindsets appear in our self-talk. So let's think about these thoughts and see if we can identify them. So this would be listening for the language of the mindsets. And if you're a resident, maybe you can speak about your experience and you can type these in the chat. And if you're an attending, I want you to imagine what these mindsets sound like. So the exercise is, if a resident uses a fixed mindset under this circumstance, what would they think when they are on wards or in conference and their attending discovers a knowledge gap? If this resident had a fixed mindset, what would they say to themselves? So feel free to put on your fixed mindset hat and tell me from that mindset, what would a resident say to themselves if they were on wards or in conference and their attending discovers a knowledge gap? So this is a time where you can type in the chat what you either as a resident have actually thought or as an attending. So I see things, I should have known that. How could I not know? That's right. I didn't study hard enough. Good. What other things? Give me another minute here. I can never remember things. I'm with you. Okay. Okay, so you get a sense. In a fixed mindset, people can either say, I'll never get this. This is something I'm not good at. Okay, that's one. They might actually attack and say, why did they ask me that? Okay, so there's many ways that a fixed mindset thought can appear. So let's try an alternative. Let's say that you have a resident who has a growth mindset. Same circumstance. They're in wards or at a conference and attending discovers a knowledge gap. What would the self-talk be? What might they say to themselves under the same circumstance? All right, let's see what you guys got. Put on your growth mindset hat. That's great. Oh, nice. I didn't know that. So something new. Thank you. Oh, thank you. And to go look that up on Up to Date. Hey, whatever you need, whatever works. It doesn't matter because it's an opportunity to learn. So as a clinician, I can tell you that I'm revealed every day in terms of my knowledge deficits. And the way I like to think about it is this. Actually, anytime I learn something new, I think of it like getting an over-the-air update on my phone. I think of it as an upgrade or an update. Doesn't mean anything's wrong. It means I acquired something new. Thank you for, I got a couple of more. I can do a chalk talk on that. So opportunity to learn. I'm going to do a talk on the, I'm going to do a talk. So great. Other ways of learning. So good. I think you guys are getting the hang of it. So let's continue to listen to these mindsets. And so these mindsets can be insidious. And so some of you might be able to finish this phrase. Better to keep your mouth shut and be thought a fool than, I'll complete it for you, open your mouth and remove any doubt. I think that these mindsets can really conjure up a lot of thoughts. I think two constructs that I also think are related in some way to the fixed mindset would be things like perfectionism and the imposter phenomenon. So one way of I understand these is how they relate to mistakes. And so perfectionism would be an attempt to prevent your future mistakes. If you can do perfect, then you can avoid all the uncomfortableness of failure. The imposter phenomenon is really your relationship to your past mistakes. That is, you worry that at some point, all of your past mistakes will come back to haunt you, and you will be identified as the imposter that you are. And so it's important, again, to hear these and then to have your words ready. What do you do when you encounter these thoughts? And so an exercise would be, if you encounter a fixed thought, to have a growth thought ready. And so if I catch myself having a fixed thought, I will say this instead. So for perfectionism, you could say, I'm a work in progress. Or for the imposter phenomenon, my mistakes are why I succeed. And so we're really starting to think about how you can change your mindset. Now, at this point, you might be thinking this is very interesting, and I'm wondering where you might be wondering if you have any fixed thoughts. Well, there's a really pretty simple way of discovering where you might have a fixed thought, and that would be filling in this blank. So whatever your brain conjures up as the thing that you can't do, that is likely a place where you have a fixed mindset. For many people, it's about drawing and art in general. So some people might consider themselves to be accomplished artists. For the rest of us, what if I said, let's do a contest? The contest will be, I'll let you guys put up your screens, and I want you to draw your self-portrait. We'll share it with the 60 people that are on this call, and we'll try to find out who the best and, importantly, the worst drawer is at the University of Washington. Now, if that sounds like a horrible idea, then welcome to having a fixed thought. So these are self-portraits of people who said, I can't draw. And really, I think this group of people, they missed their calling. They all should have been police sketch artists, because these are clearly images of criminals. What they really did, though, is they said, I can't draw yet. They all enrolled in a class called Drawing on the Right Side of the Brain. And after 1 week of deliberate practice, of coaching, of perseverance, of practice, this is what their drawings look like. So this group of people who initially thought they could not draw were able to develop that capacity. And it points out an important way of undoing your can'ts, which is the power of yet. Anytime that you hear yourself say, I can't, you can evoke the power of yet and say, I can't yet. This is another step of getting you more towards something of a growth mindset. And the power of yet shows up in medical education. So if we go back to the Milestones 2.0, there's a part, if they have not completed level 1, I would say not yet completed. So I know that the folks putting these milestones together are really thinking about growth mindset. Another way that you can develop a growth mindset is reframing mistakes when you are learning, and the importance of mistakes for the purpose of learning. And for here, I can give you 3 examples. So Einstein said, anyone who has never made a mistake has never tried anything new. We can have an Edisonian approach, which is to say, I have not failed 1,000 times. I have successfully discovered 1,000 ways that did not make a light bulb. Or you can have Rosarian mistakes, which is we don't make mistakes, we just have happy accidents for the purpose of learning. We all know who the greatest teacher is. All right, so now we're going to shift and talk about the importance of these mindsets for faculty and for anyone who really manages people. And so this is a research study looking at managers at nuclear power plants, hydroelectric dams, a large energy company in Canada. And so you can, just to orient you to the table, on the bottom, 1 through 6 indicates the mindsets of the managers. And so you can do evaluations and find where do you fall in terms of having a proneness to having more fixed thoughts or a proneness to having more growth thoughts. And then up the vertical axis is performance rating. And so in this study, managers were asked to watch videos where the performance on the video was explicitly designed to be poor. This is called frame of reference monitoring. So you show a video of poor performance. And so it's anchored to be about 1.5. And so if you look at how those managers evaluated, what you see is regardless of their mindsets, so both the folks who are more prone to fixed thoughts and more prone to growth thoughts, they all evaluated that poor performance as poor, and there was really no difference. Then this group was shown a video where the behavioral anchors were of improved performance. So these are the same actors they're watching, although the performance is objectively better. It was designed to show improvement. And so then what happened to the evaluators based on their mindset? Interestingly, those managers who tended to have more proneness to having a fixed mindset, their first impression was sticky. So they didn't see the improvement when structurally it was there. Whereas those managers who had a growth mindset, people can change. And so they were able to see that change and recognize it based on the second video. Now, a critique of this might be, well, it's just something about those people who have growth mindset. They're just total optimists. And so what they did to counter that is they reversed the order of the videos. So in a second study, the first video they saw was anchored for high performance. And then they allowed the evaluators to evaluate. And again, for the first observation, there's really not much difference. Now, mind you, these people are at a workshop where they're being trained to do performance ratings. So I think they graded harshly, let's put it that way. So after viewing the high performance video first, they were then shown the poor performance videos and then asked to evaluate. And again, you can see that the group that had more proneness to having fixed thoughts were less likely to move from their first impression. Whereas those who had growth thoughts, they can see change, and they can see change in either direction. So I think this is really important for faculty, because it means how if we have a fixed mindset, you get stuck on your first impression. And it becomes very difficult for our residents or students to move from that. Whereas a growth mindset in the faculty means that we can see change when it happens. All right, so then the next step is, how do you change your mindset? And so it turns out in this study, they did it in 5 steps. The first involves PowerPoint, which you're seeing right now, and then asking a series of exercises and writing exercises that this group did. And so what is the first step? First step actually involves PowerPoint. As I mentioned earlier, you can put people into a growth mindset or fixed mindset condition by doing a PowerPoint. And so if you want to promote growth mindset, you introduce it to your residents and faculty. For some people, This is all you need to really change your trajectory. In the absence of knowing that you have an implicit theory, learning that you can have a growth implicit theory for some people is absolutely transformative. In a workshop setting, you can also start asking a series of questions. So one question might be, as an educator, what are at least 3 reasons why it's important to realize that people can develop their abilities? Include implications for yourself and for others that you teach. And so by answering questions like this, you self-generate explanations for why it's important to understand that people can develop. A third thing you can do is ask a how question. And this would be a great question to ask somebody who's struggling to learn something new. What is an area in which you once had low ability, but now perform quite well? How were you able to make this change? It's a great opportunity to pause and say, hey, you are already different now. How did you do that? And so you can generate explanations about why you can change, because you already have. In a writing exercise or in an actual exercise, you could write an email to someone who is struggling. Share with them examples of how abilities can be developed. So interestingly, mentoring not only benefits the mentee, it can change the mentor. So even if you write a simulated letter or email to someone who is struggling, you self-generate explanations about why abilities can be developed. Finally, a fifth question or a fifth exercise would be identify when you have been surprised by someone who has learned what you thought they could not learn. Why do you think this occurred? Reflect on the implications. And so surprise, this puts you into cognitive dissonance because, wait a second, you thought that someone could not learn, yet they did. Two things that changed, maybe the other person changed, but something that had to also change was your perspective about them. So self-generating answers in a writing exercise, for instance, can help change your mindset. And so what effect did those 5 steps have on these managers? Well, it took a group that had previously tested to be more fixed prone in their thoughts, and immediately post-intervention, they had flipped their mindset. So they went from being more fixed to more growth prone, and that was durable for 2 to 6 weeks. So it is possible to change your mindset. So pitfalls, challenges, and the future. So Carol Dweck talks about some of the pitfalls, and one of them she describes as being something she calls a false growth mindset. So for instance, I already have a growth mindset. I always have. I was born with a growth mindset. So it turns out a pure growth mindset doesn't exist. We all have fixed thoughts. The idea is that you have to cultivate it. It's an active process. And so the fact that you have fixed thoughts doesn't mean there's anything wrong. It means you return to your growth thoughts. Another false growth mindset thought would be just praise and reward effort. Well, praising unproductive effort is unproductive. You want to praise and reward practices that led to success. And then there's a thought that people who have fixed mindsets, they can't succeed. Well, a fixed mindset demands that you succeed, and you might get very good. At the same time, though, a fixed mindset might limit your potential because it's very difficult to outperform your self-image. Another aspect of, or another tantalizing thought, which would be a false growth mindset, would be, hey, let's only recruit the faculty and medical students who have growth mindset. Or let's find all the people with the most growth mindset and only promote those people to be leaders. Or let's collect all the fixies and get rid of them. As alluring as that might sound, I'll tell you, it's a trap, because it means you have a fixed mindset about their fixed mindset. And in fact, all of us have the capacity to grow. And at this point, I think it's also, I've got some real, I gave this, a similar version of this talk with the chief residents at the chief resident conference along with Abdom. And one of the chief resident says, well, what if one of my supervisors, maybe even my program director, not talking to you, Dr. Stenberg, has a fixed mindset? What does that mean? Like, how do I do that? And one of my responses was, the first thing you have to do is let go of your fixed mindset about them, because they give them the space to change as well. All right. And so what I've also come to understand, having practiced or worked with residents about growth mindset, is that it sounds really good and it's a very intellectual way of approaching growth, but there's a real, there's a difficulty around it, okay? And so I don't talk about growth mindset without talking about vulnerability. So what vulnerability is, as defined by Dr. Brene Brown, is the coming together of three things, which is uncertainty, risk, and emotional exposure. So uncertainty, you don't know what's going to happen next. Risk, high consequence. Emotional exposure, you'll have an emotion, someone else will have an emotion, you can't read the emotions or you can't manage the emotions. And I would say that kind of saying, well, go ahead and fail and make mistakes. Like, depending on your environment, that can make you feel really vulnerable. Like, what's going to happen if I make mistakes? What are the consequences? How am I going to feel about it? All right. And so anytime, though, that you continue to behave, take a growth mindset, embrace vulnerability, then you also define courage, because there can be no courage without vulnerability. In fact, vulnerability might be the best definition of courage. So I would also say, to really embrace a growth mindset, you have to be vulnerable and then brave at the same time. As soon as we start talking about vulnerability and courage, then we also have to talk about self-affect. And so self-affect is how you feel about yourself. And so in my conversations with my residents and with my attending and specialty peers, I ask them, how many of you have experienced shame or guilt as part of your medical education experience? And so far, I don't think anyone has not raised their hand when asking that. And it's important to differentiate what shame and guilt are. And so what is guilt? Guilt could be, I made a mistake, or I did something wrong. Whereas shame is, I am a mistake, or there's something wrong with me. Guilt is about what you did. You're guilty about what you did or did not do. Whereas shame is about who you are. And you can see there might be a relationship between growth mindset and guilt, and fixed mindset and shame. As uncomfortable as guilt is as a negative self-affect, it's actually considered a constructive negative self-affect. That is, you can say, guilty is charged. How do I make amends? How do I make this right? And in that sense, it's constructive. Whereas shame, potentially, your response set is different. You might run, you might hide, you might attack, you might defend. The difference between these two might seem semantic, although shame is correlated with addiction, bullying, depression, and suicide, whereas guilt is inversely related. And so what I would propose is that you try to navigate to guilt proneness, which I think is really saying navigate to growth mindset. Now, shame is starting to be increasingly studied in medical education, and so shame is this intensely painful feeling that says that there's something wrong with you and somehow unworthy. Right? We all have it. In fact, the only people that don't have shame are those people who lack the capacity for social connection, so sociopaths. So the alternative is sociopath or experience shame, so tough choice, right? It has consequences. So shame can be caused by patient care events, learning, not meeting a certain goal. Factors that can contribute can be comparison, which we've talked about, perfectionism, fear of judgment. The effects can be impaired isolation, disengagement from learning, diminished psychological and physical well-being. We're going to touch on that again. Impaired empathy. And so the important thing to do then is that we need to recognize shame, normalize it, confront it, and understand it. And there's some really nice research from Dr. Bynum at Duke talking about shame. All right, other challenges. Other challenges are really about, well, how effective is it? And is this really just a fad? Is this eventually going to go by? And so about 5 years ago, there were two meta-analyses that were suggesting that the effect size for growth mindset was really overstated and really not that great, not that much. And so what Carol Dweck would say is, well, we're just not there yet. All right, so the effect sizes. So it turns out that, at least at the time of this study, the effect size was low for overall. That's the one on the far right. Although comparable to the effect sizes for broad-based faculty education and broad-based attempts to improve faculty knowledge. For at-risk groups of students, growth mindset interventions were comparable to reducing class size for an entire year. And so one of the arguments for it would say, these are 1-hour interventions. A 1-hour intervention can have nearly the equivalent amount of benefit as reducing class size for a year. So as a cost-effective means of improvement, there are probably a few things that are more effective. The most recent large study of growth mindset, again, this is in high schools, showed that the effect size actually is probably closer to 0.25. And there are more and more attempts to integrate growth mindset. And so this is a wonderful article by Richardson et al., which includes one of our colleagues, Eric Warm, looking at growth mindset in competency-based education. And so if you are interested in really seeing where this is going and really identifying spaces for further research in medical education, this would be a great place to start. And so I'll just give you some of my perspectives on growth mindset. And I'll first say that's a really useful model. I think it's a useful model. But as a model, it's wrong. It is not, we don't have growth mindset parts of our brain. It is a construct of our own making, okay? And so I wouldn't try to make it too real. So this is just me waxing philosophic a bit. I will say I fully expect growth mindset to either be continually improved or even supplanted, and that's okay. But in terms of a useful construct, I think that there's probably few that are more useful. And just to orient you to these two pictures, the picture on the left is an actual photo, if you believe it, of Seattle, and the picture on the right is from Google. It's from Google Maps. And the reason I show this is the Google Maps is wrong, okay, because there's no traffic, right? Yet it's really useful, and I consider growth mindset in the same way. So getting close to finishing here, and there are other internal medicine programs that are really looking at growth mindset. So Cincinnati, we mentioned Eric Warren, UNLV, the other UW. And then other things we can think about is our patients. What if we had patients who had growth mindset and we taught it to them? Well, some of the research which suggests that you can decrease hemoglobin A1C, so you can have real clinical benefit. And then finally, I just came back from academic internal medicine, and the University of Washington graduate, Dr. Tate Shanafelt, talked about well-being, and he mentioned growth mindset as really being part of well-being 2.0, and so it's something else to consider. With that, hope that we've accomplished our goals of giving you an introduction, telling you a little bit of how it can be applied to medical education, and talked about where this might be going. I want to take a moment to express gratitude to the residents that have let me develop this at Virginia Mason. And while we didn't really talk about where growth mindset comes from, I'm just so grateful for my parents, who I can tell you, my father in this picture was a pulmonary critical care fellow at the University of Washington, and my mother did her research on platelets at the VA. And so My family has a real connection here. And this is me when I was not yet a physician. And with that, I'm happy to take any questions and discussion. So Dr. Abe, anything that you got for me?
Dr. Calderon, thank you so much for an important and thought-provoking talk for all of us as learners and educators. We have probably time for 1 to 2 questions. So for those in the audience, please post in the chat if you have any questions, and I will start us off actually. I just wonder, Dr. Calderon, if you have any advice or practical tips for sort of approaching a mindset mismatch between teachers and learners, whether it's the learner is acting with more fixed mindset and the teacher has a growth mindset, or vice versa, ways that we can approach those situations to kind of help both parties.
Great. It's a great question. And I think really this question comes from somebody who is coming from a growth mindset, looking at somebody else. And that can either be a resident looking at those who supervise them, or from an attending looking at the people that they're teaching. And again, the first thing that the person with the growth mindset has to think about in relation to other people is to loosen up their fixed mindset about them. So the first thing that you have to do is to give space for them to change. If you think they have a fixed mindset, they won't change. And if they do, you won't see it. And so the first thing you have to do is just loosen up there. And then probably the next thing to do, there's probably things about hierarchy. If you are the attending, the first thing that you can do is share your mistakes, tell people that you're going to learn from them, in particular, the people that you're training, so that they know it's okay. This is the way that it works around here. And then if you are the learner and you're trying to manage up, then it might be asking them questions like, and so it seems like you've really got this figured it out, or asking those questions like, was there ever a time where you couldn't do something and then you learned how to do it? How did you do that? So those sort of questions change the mindset of the respondent. Okay, so those would be two things. So asking for help, or asking people who are supervising you, how did they manage to change? Those would be 2 things.
That's great advice, kind of approaching it from a growth mindset to begin with, and then also trying to, ask probing questions to change the person's mindset. I love that. Another question I had was, sort of in a lot of ways, the institution of medical training that we've created as a system is built on a fixed mindset, and sort of the way we do evaluations, things like that. How can we break that down as both individual educators as well as on a system-wide level, the sort of pressure to perform and be evaluated throughout all stages of our medical training to kind of more foster a better growth mindset amongst all of our physicians?
These are such great questions. You're doing a great job. So I think you're right, that there are systems that can tell a person this environment is fixed and I'm going to be defined by it. The things that are probably most prone to do that would be anything where you promote and say, this test defines you, and or we will compare you. Comparison can really generate these things, and because it becomes real when somebody actually is in front of you. So dismantling those concepts and those constructs, like comparative evaluation, that we should do away from. And so competency-based education, I think that sent us in the right direction. Things like class rank, that makes it real. That really reifies it. So getting rid of class rank in those schools that still have that, I think is really important.
That's great. And then just one other comment before we close out here in the chat, just going back to the conversation about mindset with a patient-doctor relationship and how it can be a little bit tricky. How we can, errors that are made by physicians that are seen by patients as sort of bad medical practice or bad service. So sometimes it can be harder for doctors to embrace that mindset of growth. Is there any comments you have about that phenomenon?
Really, really important question. So one place where you can situate growth mindset that's protected from those spaces would be in the context of learning. So in a simulation, in a learning environment where the purpose of the mistake is to learn, that's a very appropriate place for it. What you're talking about is the space where we perform as physicians, where mistakes aren't tolerated. In that space, we really do need to make sure that we learn as quickly as possible. From that, once mistakes are made, then we do need to offer up, this is what we learned. Our intent, we didn't do this to learn. Yet, first, we're going to make you safe. And then next, our promise to you is we're going to learn from this so that it doesn't happen again. And so I think I would, one, just make sure, very clear that mistakes for the purpose of learning in an explicit learning environment where safety is where it's safe to fail, that you can do growth mindset. In those places where performance is necessary, there you actually do want to minimize mistakes. And after that happens, a growth mindset will still benefit you. But in those performance spaces, you don't make mistakes for the purpose of learning, right? You might learn after the mistake, but you don't make mistakes for the purpose of learning.
Okay. All right, that's great. Well, we are right at 1 o'clock. So I wanted to say thank you again for the excellent talk. And for everyone in the audience, have a great weekend, everybody. Take care.
Hey,
bye.
Doc, hey, Bob, great to see you. We need to play golf. Oh my God. Thank you so much, everyone. I'm just delighted to be able to spend time with you.